there, Warriors of Light. Welcome back to another character review, this time well overdue for Cecil Harvey. I apologize. The last couple weeks I've actually been extremely sick, so it's hard for me to get any kind of content together, but I'm kind of going through a backlog right now. I planned on doing Cecil for you. Once I did Kane and Rosa, I also intend to do the holiday units and obviously the new Dwayne release as well. But let's just get right into it. Cecil Harvey, fantastic character overall. Let me say that just to preface this. One of the things I really need to outline better in these reviews is how you're going to use this character, because in the prior reviews, I've really looked at what they're doing in PvP, specifically in the Guild Wars and what you're going to find in Arena. Cecil is okay for those. He's got his spot, but really he shines in more of the manual content because his kit is it's a little tricky with the AI, to be honest. But he's got a lot of power, lot of potential, either to be a giant bruising DPS or to be kind of a support off tank. It really depends on the content you're using him for. So let's just kind of jump into it here. He's a light element. 3 jobs here. The Lunar paladin is unique to him. He also runs soldier and monk. He wields a sword, and he can equip the armor, helmet, accessory. That's pretty standard for this kind of DPS. With your baseline move of 3 and jump of 1, also nothing crazy there. Being light, he's 10% weak to dark. And the resistances are really actually interesting, where he's 20% slash resistance and 15% pierce resistance, with only weaknesses to missile and magic at 10%, which even is not that egregiously weak. So let's just preface this from the outset. He's a character that requires a lot of care because he does have a fair amount of abilities that drain his HP, make him rather brittle, more so than you'd like to see out of someone that's truly an off tank. And I think that's really what it is. It's you use him either as an off tank or as a pure DPS. So the pros here, he is a great off tank with the potential to give teammates physical and magical shields. He does have a double hit ability, and he's a light slash unit, so there's some combos there for chaining, where slash is super popular. There's a lot of light characters. I know in the most recent Golbez event, I know him and Ramza were like an easy light slash chain where it already exists in the game. He also has a great TMR. You're going to see that mentioned again later on. Strong attack resistances, like I said, I like the slash and the pierce assist, and there's a lot of variability in how you can build them, so that's a pro. Also a con, though. The con's lots of self HP draining abilities. The second con is he may make your comp too light heavy. Engelbert and Warrior Light are 2 of the most common tanks you're going to find, at least physical wise. So, other than like what Whisper, Rain, maybe some like Halloween Ryu, like there's really you're going to be light heavy if you're putting your Cecil in here. The third, he requires precision AI if you're using him in that Guild Wars and Arena. He really does suffer because if you're going to use him as the off tank, you need to have either a healer ready to heal up the HP, or B, have it so that your team is so grouped together that when he uses his physical or magical shields, he only has to use it once on his teammates around him. If he has to use that ability twice, he's already at half health, which is just ridiculous. You're not going to live long with that. And he doesn't have any innate defense penetration, which actually does matter, because when we're talking about like the strongest DPS in the game right now, that's kind of becoming a more critical element to characters. Even if he does have like light slash and some multi hits, and you can see he's got a monk sub job. Unless he can really get through some of these defenses, he's not going to hit very hard. And overall, in that battle of attrition, if you're not killing things very fast and you're also sucking your HP up, it's just a recipe for disaster. So we're going to get more into that as we go on here. I wanted to quickly get into the stat outlook. This in particular is his HP. And the column in particular I want to draw your attention toward here is the second one. This is the total HP with the board and his passive abilities. We're going to get into those passives soon. He does have 2 of them that boost HP. So overall, he does have a relatively high health pool, potentially. Really depends how you gear him. And then he does have that middling amount of defense as well, where you can see like he and Agrias are in that like mid-teens range as an off tank. Same with Ryu, where they're not really true tanks, but they have that kill fear too. They have that defense to kind of bulk them up a smidge, which is it is valuable. It's worth mentioning. It just doesn't allow him to be really that true main tank presence on the battlefield, particularly because he also doesn't have any hate generating abilities. So kind of a demerit in that sense, where he does a couple things okay, but doesn't do any job perfectly. The second thing here is accuracy. Overall, he's pretty decent accuracy-wise. He does have a fairly high luck stat here if you're at 217. It's not the highest, but it's not low either. It makes him competitive, which is important because luck, impacts your accuracy, your evasion, your ability to crit. So that's a good sign at least. Dexterity wise, he's also on the higher end of the spectrum. Obviously, not near the tops here, but throughout the rest of the cast of characters, he competes. So accuracy, he's got it. You can gear him for more; it never hurts, but not something that I think you need to really be worried about too much when you're going into the build. So let's go into the class and the job overview here. And this is really where I'm going to spend more time than I normally do because this character is really a clay and you need to mold him however you want. The passive abilities here, the Blood of the Lunarians increases his defense, increases his HP. I think that's almost a must-have for this character. And where the rest of this comes into is how you want to build him. So he's a Lunar Paladin #1. #2, he's the oh goodness, soldier. There we go. And then #3, he's the monk. So whether you want to gear him more for his slash attack or whether you want to give him some strike abilities as well, Strike Mastery has its spot. I've attempted to use it, not with great success. It's nice that he has strike abilities, but overall has not made him as powerful as I'd hoped. Self-sacrifice obviously beefs him up considerably with the attack boost, but getting those resistance decreases also makes him relatively brittle. So if you're going to be using self-sacrifice, you either A, need someone to babysit his health pool and heal him up constantly, or B, just purely make him a glass cannon. So really hard to balance this, but then that fourth ability, the HP level up, also really strong depending on how you want to build him. And we're going to get more into these four because these four are really going to influence how you overall build his kit. Counter abilities, we'll just kind of gloss over. He's got a regular chance to counter physical damage and reduce it. I personally like that first one. I like the fact that he can reduce physical damage taken. The second one is a generic counter slash, and the third one is a fist counter, where if you are building him to be, a strong monk and try to abuse the lack of strike resistance in the game, it's there and it's valuable. I just like bulking him up with that first one personally. Lunar Paladin here. So the thing about Cecil, you have to think in the context of how you're going to use him. I'm going to talk very briefly on PvP right now, where we're getting into essentially you're seeing the Kayn meta or the Pierce meta. And then you're also getting, there's not a lot of Pierce resistance from that perspective. So I think the best thing you can do for your comps in that PvP right now is either A, have characters that have abilities like Devoted Defense here, where you reduce physical damage taken. I know Warrior of Light has that in his kit. I know Kilf has it in her kit. There's a few others where this ability, since there's not a lot of Pierce resistance equipment or cards, this type of defense of ability is valuable. And the second thing is, if you're looking at status effects, those have always been powerful. You've seen a Grice meta for a long time because of it. And Cecil does have a fair amount of status effects in his kit potentially. So if you're going against something like a Kayn meta at the moment, where you're really trying to build up either pierce resistance or ways to mitigate the damage, or use status effects to essentially beat the shit out of the enemy Kayn and eliminate him from acting. Cecil does have some potential for that. It's really finicky to get the AI right. Because think of it this way: this Shining double attack, chance to inflict or disable, that's pretty powerful. Same thing where you can use this Devoted Defense to mitigate all kinds of damage. I know on his Limit Break he has the chance to stun. So a lot of different things for him to use in his kit, depending on how you want to use him as an off tank. Going through this a little more, this Light's Protection ability is good because it does increase his defense. Really just depends on how many abilities you want him to use before the fight starts. You can usually get 1 or 2 abilities in, whether that's a TMR ability or whether you want him to be using something else in the other jobs, which we'll get to in a second. But this is where you really have to be finicky with the AI. Devoted Defense here is fantastic as an ability, but you'll notice it consumes 25% of his HP. So if you can get your teammates grouped up in this square for him to use it once, you can probably get away with it as a really good ability. Like I mentioned earlier, the problem is if when he starts to use it twice in succession, you literally just can't start a fight at 50% health. It's ridiculous. And you're going to waste your healer's turn as well if they're just kind of babysitting him. So really depends on how you want to use this ability and how tanky your comp already is. If you do end up omitting this, you're obviously going to be using Cecil more as the status effect and as a debuffer as well. Don't count out this Holy Knight's Blade. Problem is it does skew a little higher in AP, so you're not going to use it on T1, probably T2 or T3. But decreasing attack is also another valuable way to kind of hedge yourself against the meta that's going on right now, where you figure if you can't outright, resist pierce attacks from an equipment perspective, you can at least do things to debuff the enemy, provide shields to your team, or use status effects to try to get the edge that way. So Cecil does have some ways to compete, and if you recall, he does have his own innate 15% pierce resistance, so he can theoretically compete on the battlefield. It really just depends on how you want to build him here. The actual main job here as the sub job, the Lunar Paladin, not a huge fan. Lightbringer is decent because it's another AoE ability for him. But Devoted Guard, this is really niche if you're trying to make him defend against magic attacks. And even again, it still has that same downside risk of consuming his own HP. I honestly think this is probably super, super niche. This is more the kind of thing you're going to use on manual maps. And this is where you can see where Cecil would really shine if you're using him in a comp of 5 people, where you're obviously going to have a healer already in your comp. You're obviously already going to have a main tank. You're going to have a slew of vision cards to beef up your team, and you're going to be able to pick and choose how you want to use Devoted Defense and Devoted Guard against whatever computer AI you're fighting against. So this is where Cecil gets like an absolute A+, because if you're using him for manual PvE or even PvP, he really does have a fair amount of strengths to help your team compete. It's really in the 3v3s where you're running on the AI that he has some pretty significant weaknesses. Moving on here, the Soldier class. This is a supremely potent class, but again, a lot of these have HP draining abilities, so Hazard Form here. Same thing with Hazard Spin and Hazard Break. So it depends on how, potent you want him to be. I also kind of poo-poo this class because it is a slash class, so if you're using Soldier and Lunar Paladin, he's 100% slash. And like we mentioned earlier, he doesn't have any innate defense penetration. So since slash is a pretty popular thing to build resistances against, he's not going to hit as hard as you'd like him to. And if you're using him as a pure DPS, there's probably just better other DPS out there, if that makes sense. Where Cecil really shines is really kind of that off-tank support role, or being able to suck up some extra damage, not in how much he can actually dish out, at least not in a PvP sense. And then finally, the Monk class. Like I mentioned before, I tried to run a couple different comps here. I really tried to brainstorm, like, how can you abuse the lack of strike resistance? And I ran comps with, like, Engelbert, Cecil, and even Mashari, like triple Monk with the vision card to boost strike attack. I've tried a couple different things, and it's not that potent, to be honest. It kind of sucks. To me, if you're going to build the Monk sub-job, which I've been doing for myself, I've essentially been using it for the store ability, where if he's approaching enemies on the battlefield, store is really great to make him super potent on that second attack. And then secondly, the purification skill actually here, where if you do run into potential status effects, Cecil can kind of step in really quickly and hopefully dispel some of these on your main tank or your healer or whoever else you're playing with. The other attacks here are obviously valuable because this is Terra Slash is multi-hit, it's got some AoE, Surge Strike is super cheap, and it has a long range, so like it does have value, but I just have yet to see him overcome any defensive thresholds and really blow up enemy teams. So the Monk is honestly probably the recommended sub-job in my opinion, and I do like using Store and Purification at the minimum, and sure, you can probably throw in one of these other threes, but it really depends on how you're trying to build your Cecil. This Limit Burst, freaking awesome. 43 AP is pretty cheap. 200% is a pretty powerful ability, and this ability to inflict stun is awesome, particularly because, like I mentioned, the more status effects, the better you can kind of throw a wrench into what your enemy is doing. And then the TMR, I love this TMR, absolutely love it. A ton of it's an accessory number one, ton of HP for an accessory. It does give an additional set of attack for him, so it's probably only going to get 21 attack because you figure you're going to have a weapon, and so this attack stat's going to get halved with the new buff in the recent weeks. A little bit of extra defense for him, which is nice. This TMR skill is pretty awesome though. The increased attack and magic. I like this TMR, even if you're not using it for Cecil. In part of a character review, it's worth getting the TMR in general. The reason why I say that, I have put this on a couple DPS where there are some DPS that don't innately have teammate buffing abilities, which means they essentially ooga booga straight ahead into the battlefield and kind of kamikaze more than you like them to. But if you could throw this TMR, and so I'm talking about someone like Kane or Delita or even Glaciella, where they don't have any teammate buffing abilities. If you throw this on them, you actually might allow them to group up with your teammates a little easier. So really something to consider. I've mentioned that in past reviews. I'll probably continue to mention it going forward as well. Getting into the vision card synergies, this is where, again, Cecil's kind of niche because he's obviously just a generic light slash attack character. You can essentially use him as a pack mule character where you can probably put on a couple different vision cards to round out your team as opposed to vision cards that really enhance Cecil. So the first one here is the Aegion card. I like it because it's got some slash resist penetration. So if you are running Cecil as a slash heavy character, like we'd mentioned, this at least kind of gives him a smidge of an edge to kind of penetrate some of the resistances your teammates might or your enemies might have. It's got a fair attack stat. It's got some HP, which is nice. It boosts up the accuracy not only for him via the party effect, but also the extra dexterity. And as a party effect, it increases overall slash attack. So if you are running Cecil with someone like an Engelbert or a Warrior of Light already, this is obviously going to help multiple characters at once. Second one here, I use this card a lot as well. I love Fenrir for two reasons. Number one, a gluttonous amount of HP at 362. It also gives him an HP up of 10%. That magic resist for the party can be very valuable, where Cecil has an 10% weakness. This will essentially flip it, so he's got a 10% strength. And as I mentioned, if he is pairing with someone like Engelbert already, Engelbert has a minus 30 magic resist. This will obviously make Engelbert stronger from that perspective as well. Really depends on how you're approaching your enemies in this PvP context. But the last thing that I really love is the agility of 4. I didn't talk about this earlier, but this is kind of a weakness of Cecil's, where he is a relatively slow character. I believe his board and his stats, he only gets to 55 agility at base. As you saw, none of his support abilities boost his agility. He does have an attack here. I'm going to just smidge back here. The speed of light attack, where it increases agility 1 turn. But obviously, like if you're using Cecil, you're not going to be spamming the speed of light attack. There's a lot more efficient ways to use his characters. So agility wise, it's really going to depend on what you do for your equipment and what you do for your Espers. But I like this card because that 4 agility really does chip in a fair amount. Odin here is also a fantastic card. A ton of HP on this card. Great attack stat. The human killer to increase his potency. And then the increased single unit attack resistance is underratedly powerful right now. It always has been, but a lot of these Dragoons are single unit attacks with how they jump. And just in general, I mean, attack resist 20% for single unit attacks. Super powerful for a lot of the dueling that goes on in the current maps. Yeah. Overall, good card. I don't think you can ever go wrong with this card. I do also like Golem. Not the strongest potency. This is really if you're building him more for sustain. A ton of HP here at 500. And then the HP percent buff to your team as well. This is really if you're going for more of that brawl style comp where you're trying to outlast your enemies and really just bulk up your team enough to kind of get by some of the incoming damage. So if you're using Cecil in a capacity where he's giving shields to his teammates, he's buffing his own HP, you have a healer to kind of fill those health pools, you can kind of get by the lack of pierce resistance or missile resistance depending on how you're building your team. Worth noting at least. And then the final one, Vow of Love. Even though Cecil's probably not going to be main tanking here, I still really like this card for 2 reasons. Because number one, he will be bulky enough to take a hit from an enemy. So even though he runs that hate 5, that's not going to last throughout the whole fight. That's really just to ensure that in the first turn or two, your healer or your third character doesn't mistakenly get aggroed if they're too too mobile or too fast. But obviously, fair amount of HP. The slash attack is nice for Cecil because he's a slash heavy character. And then overall, the party buff of attack 30% I really like as well. So this is the kind of card where if you're using Cecil in that off tank role, if you're using him with Warrior of Light is going to naturally outpace Cecil for hate generation based upon Warrior of Light's own passives, and even if you're using the Taunting Blade from the Spellblade subclass, and then if you are running him with someone like Engelbert, those two in conjunction with each other, although Engelbert may not actually sustain the hate depending upon how much he uses Taunting Blade, him and Cecil can kind of go back and forth in taking the brunts of a bunch of different hits, which is nice, and obviously synergize as well from that perspective. So that's really it, unfortunately. That's why I say he's a pack mule character, because you can probably throw another card depending on how you want to play your comp, but it's kind of limited, unfortunately. Yeah, well, we'll move on here. Esper synergy is kind of the same thing. There's really no one Esper that shines for him. I think Odin's probably the clear-cut best. Increases his slash attack, increases human killer. You could potentially build him for extra slashes, just depending on how what enemies you're attacking in PvP. 80 attack is great to buff Cecil's ability to kill things, and the large thing here is the agility of 19 that buffs Cecil to a really competitive speed with a lot of other characters. I think this is probably the clear-cut favorite because the rest of them, although good, probably not as good. This is going the complete other direction. Golem is woefully slow, only 10 agility, but again, you're really bulking up Cecil here. With the extra HP, it's got a fuck ton of attack still to make him super potent in terms of attack potency. Increased defense on the board is great to bulk up Cecil from that regard, and then pierce resist as well. Where if you're putting Cecil in, he's already got that innate 15%. He can get another 25% here, or you can go with the human killer depending on how you want to do it. So this is the kind of thing where you're going to balance Golem depending upon what kind of equipment you're giving him. If you have TMRs that are going to boost his agility to offset it, or even if you're just going to decide, hey, Cecil's going to be slow as hell, but he's going to pack a punch, and we're just going to bulk up on defense and HP and try to outlast the enemy. Potentially viable. Third one here that I thought was very underrated, the red chocobo. And I say this for the agility stats. 17 agility here on this character. 70 attack is still competitive with a lot of other ones. The really big downside here is he's got the innate dark minus 10%. So essentially your Cecil, if he's equipping this, is going to be at negative 20% weakness to dark. But Chocobo does have dark resist built in. You can see at the bottom there on the board, where you can potentially build it so that Cecil's only got 5% weakness to dark. And that's really just important depending upon what enemies you're picking against playing. Where if you're going against Kane heavy teams or Knight of Ruin Stern or the new Dark Tank that's coming out, if you want to make your Cecil fast and offset the dark weakness, Chocobo can still do that. And you can see on the board he also still has the attack 15% and the slash attack 10%. So for Cecil's strengths, hey, you want to boost up some attack, boost up the agility, this card is still an underratedly good card to do that. I just know it's a limited time Esper, so you might not have it, unfortunately, but such is life. Same thing for Death Machine, limited time, which is unfortunate, but not my favorite. This is really just if you're trying to bulk up, again, that bruise heavy Cecil. We're a ton of HP here, ton of attack, 80 attack. It's still on the slower spectrum of things, but at least the increased defense on the board is really powerful. The rest of the board for Death Machine is relatively weak, I would say. There's some missile resist, but I don't know if you're really building Cecil to go against gunner comps per se. You could. It's there. But the rest of the board is relatively weak. This is just genuinely if you want to have almost a different version of Golem. I still think Golem's probably superior here, but it's really just the extra 2 agility it's worth mentioning that Death Machine has over him. And then finally, my catch-up goes with absolutely everything is Aegeon. 14 agility is a good middle-of-the-pack agility. A ton of HP. The attack is still relatively okay. It's obviously the weakest of the 5, but 65 is still something. And then the board, the pierce resist, the magic resist, and the accuracy. Really big fan of those to round out some of what Cecil's weak to, where he's weak to magic, or if you're trying to gear extra heavy against Pierce, he's got this too. Overall, great Espers, but very few optimal. Again, truly situational for how you're building your Cecil. And then recommended equipment. Swords, I think Nagarok's the clear-cut winner here, where if, I would say the Assault, 162 attack, and then the increased slash attack of 15. I think that's really the clear-cut winner. There's very few other swords. The other one here is the Lazalia Royal Guard sword. And same idea here. It's one of the highest attacks. The huge benefit here is if you're really trying to make your Cecil very accurate, you're essentially trading the boost to slash attack for the extra accuracy if you're using this sword. So this is more for guaranteed hits at the expense of a little extra offensive power. So definitely worth considering as well. I don't know if either one of these swords is objectively better than the other. Just depending on where you're getting your extra accuracy from or where you're getting your extra attack from. Non-TMR equipment. I've never mentioned this before because this is from the manual PvP, and it's hard to grind the metals for this. But platinum armor, I'll be honest, you could probably get away with grinding for one platinum armor, making it just like a +0 or a plus, not even a +1, just a +0. Because, if you omit the strike resistance, if you don't really care about that ability, there's still just an absolute fuck ton amount of HP here, and the defense as well. So you're kind of, hoping to the RNG guards that when you craft this, you're getting either, shield or vital. But to me, shield is pretty damn optimal here for something that Cecil wants to run, where it's got a ton of HP and a ton of defense here. The only other armors that are non-TMR that really compete is something like the golden armor, but you're giving up a -3 agility on the golden armor, which, again, hurts Cecil fairly greatly. And the other two here are pretty decent. Armor of Light I like because magic resist does round out Cecil's innate magic resistance. It's obviously just slightly inferior in terms of HP and defense, but this is probably the more accessible to everybody, so you're probably going to see this a lot more often. And then finally, the one that came out with Cecil's event, the Holy Knight's shoulder plate. This is a good one too. I think my only problem with this, its extra ability, the missile resist, it's good if you're obviously gearing against gunner comps, but the rest of this armor, to me, is semi-inferior to the Armor of Light. I don't think the extra 150 HP is worth the trade-off of the 3% drop in defense, the -5 to evade, and just the fact that the magic resistance is more valuable to Cecil than the missile resistance. Oh, let me take that back, because he's also weak to missile. But you're going to see probably more magic users on average than you would gunner. No, I guess that's equally untrue. You can see both. Honestly, at the end of the day, either of these are good. Let's leave it at that. There's a reason why I have both of them here. It's because they're both good. It's just dependent upon what you're going against. And then finally, I've never used this one either, but it's, again, the other PvP item. It's expensive to get. And obviously, you're hoping for some RNG here where you want to essentially, get the crit or the dodge. At the end of the day, though, the only reason this is on here is for the agility of 6, where if you're trying to boost agility here and you want to use a different kind of TMR, like an armor TMR, this is really it for accessories. The other accessories are kind of not what Cecil needs. I would honestly recommend using one of the armors for the non-TMR equipment. Alexandrite ring. If you don't need the accuracy, or you don't need don't need the crit on him, Alexandrite ring doesn't really do a whole lot. It does round out resistances against all the elements, which is cool, but stat-wise doesn't offer him a ton. And then some of the other accessories, just like the ribbon, I don't know if stop is really a prevalent thing you need to look out for potentially. And a lot of the other accessories are built to increase evasion, like the sortilege and the I just mentioned it, the other accessory, my goodness, ribbon. If you're not building for Cecil for evade, which you're probably not, let's be real, those accessories, the extra perks don't really synergize with what Cecil wants to do. So really, Armor of Light and Holy Knight shoulder plate, probably the two best you can pick. TMR equipment, I'm a big fan of the old Owen apron. This is an accessory. The reason why I love this is the increased defense penetration. We mentioned that's a weakness of Cecil's. Obviously, it's got the AP auto restore as well, which is really valuable. Good stats in terms of boosting the accuracy here as well, where this could be a source of that if you're not using something else, if you're not using anything else to boost accuracy. But good, probably my favorite TMR for him. Second one is his own TMR, which I'm a big fan of. Obviously, it gives him a little extra defense, bulks up the HP considerably from an accessory standpoint, and obviously this buff is really great also. Can't go wrong with that. The third one, I do like Sid's as well. A ton of HP on an accessory. It's got a bunch of defense here, and the 5 agility, underrated. So that's what we're talking about here. If you need sources of agility, this is one. I've heard from guildmates that people will use Bolt Barrage now in the AI. It used to be that Sid was the only one who would ever use it, but there have been reports of Bolt Barrage being used on other characters. I know Gilgamesh for a fact has used it in some of our guild stuff. But if there's the potential here that Cecil can also use this ability on himself, this is going to be really powerful for letting him live longer in the fight. So big thumbs up. And the obligatory Illusory Bell. There's not a character this doesn't go well on. The defense of 8, the agility of 7, here's your accuracy, the auto restore. Absolutely fantastic. This is probably the best accessory you can give Cecil as well, but depends on what your rest of your comp is if someone else is hogging this instead of him. And then honorable mentions. This is the only reason you'd ever use these is if you decided to put an accessory on him on the non-TMR slot. And as you saw, like, I really don't have any suggestions for accessories. It's really nothing. So the odds of you using armor on the TMR slot are relatively low. And even then, like Holy Knight armor, this is Agrias's. If you have an Agrias, let's be real, you're probably using her instead of Cecil in your PvP content. So, him wearing this is moot. I mean, it's obviously amazing because it gives himself protect and shell, and it bulks him up considerably. But yeah, if you have this, that means you have Agrias maxed, and you're probably using her. And second one is Glaciella's armor, the White Wolf armor. I like this one too because it does restore some HP. Restore some AP. Increase slash resist, makes them bulkier in that perspective. And then the HP and the defense is obviously pretty great here too. So, yeah, Cecil's a really interesting character. I think he truly shines if you can use him manually, where you're able to use a multitude of different things, related to status effects, to debuffs, to shielding for teammates. He does have some pretty great offensive capabilities, but really limited in 3v3 style arena PvP for guild wars and things of that nature. Overall, I also think he's valuable just for the TMR. So if you've been using resources to acquire that TMR, I do think it has some use for the rest of your team. But overall, big thumbs up for Cecil. I'm glad he's a free unit. I'd feel really bad for people that pulled him, to be honest, because I don't know how much lasting power he has. But yeah, when you're talking about a Pierce strong meta right now, Cecil probably does have a spot. It's just really specific to the map. I think the current guild map that we're on, where it's a lot of those mountainous regions and people cut across really quickly, Cecil's probably going to have a hard time against. But who knows what kind of guild arenas or arena maps come out in the future, and what buffs they give those maps. Cecil could actually be super useful for a lot of different reasons. So that's it. Thanks again for listening to the review. I do intend on doing some of the holiday units, Ramada and Mashari soon. I just want to bang this out first, and then really looking forward to Dwayne that's coming out this week. He's a very whale-oriented character because he's a double cost limited unit, but he's got some things that we're going to get into that will tempt you to pull for him, even if it's economically the worst thing you could do for your wallet. Anyways, thanks so much for listening, guys. Hope you got something out of this, and happy pulling. Good luck with your pulls in RNG.